If you can get by on a werewolf not hopped up on bottomless mimosas, then Marvel's Werewolf by Night just might have you covered. Unlike most of what you've seen so far in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Werewolf by Night digs deep into Marvel's horror roots with a night in the life of Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night. You heard me. I'm Chris Goodmakers, and let's see what other details you can mine for the latest MCU special. With the trailer for Werewolf by Night, Marvel also managed to reveal Marvel's new special presentation one-offs. Like a lot of nostalgic things, the special presentation was a feature of a time when things were kinda worse for whatever reason, where there were the 3 major networks that showed the same programs for 6 months, and then replayed them the other 6 months. Every once in a while, especially around the holidays, you get a special little nugget of special programming that you would have to see it when it happened because it might never get seen again. And then you're left wondering if you really did see Adam West's Batman in some sort of legion of superheroes, or did you make that up? You did not. Thanks, Internet.
His symbol, a frightening creature of the night. His disguise strikes terror into the criminal heart.
To let you know that you were about to watch something special, they'd play an opening reel like the ones announcing the feature presentation at a movie theater in the time of shorts and newsreels. CBS and HBO were memorable for theirs, especially since HBO played theirs before every one of their original movies. Sometimes the special presentation would be the rebroadcast of a classic movie like the Universal horror film, The Wolfman, and sometimes it would be a pilot masquerading as a TV movie. Werewolf by Night might actually fit both these bills. It is clearly dripping in classic horror nostalgia. It may also be acting as a pilot to an entirely different project. This is less a hidden detail, and more of a case of everyone hoping that this is Chekhov's superheroes. No, not the Starfleet officer Chekhov, the playwright and author, who suggested that if you introduce a gun in the beginning of a story, it needs to be used by somebody at the end. In this case, our 3 protagonists, Elsa Bloodstone, Jack Russell, and Man-Thing, all have in common is that they've all been members of the Midnight Suns. Imagine the Avengers, but made up of all the goth kids from the Marvel Universe. Or what happens when Ghost Riders try to form the world's most intense motorcycle club, but then have to fill the ranks out because it's hard to get more than a couple spirits of vengeance in one place at a time. Other members have included Doctor Strange, Wong, and Blade. If you are inclined to squint through the ever-shifting sands of continuity in the multiverse, there is at least a Robbie Reyes out there in one version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. 2022 saw the release of a Midnight Suns video game, and a feature film has been in the works for some time now, with no official launch date yet. But having a Halloween special that introduces 3 members of the Suns to the MCU, there's hope that, like Chekhov's gun, these dark heroes will come together to hold back a mystical threat. Werewolf by Night didn't just let the special presentation opening do all the heavy nostalgia lifting. As the Marvel logo does its Marvel All-Stars Flipbook tribute, the logo takes several swipes from an unseen werewolf claw as the picture goes from color to black and white. They weren't done yet though. After all, this is the directorial debut of film composer Michael Giacchino, who also handles the score on the film. The immediately recognizable Marvel Studios fanfare follows the cinematography back to the time of Universal and the Hammer horror films, including brighter brass and more dissonant harmonies. The special revolves around the Great Monster Hunt, where the world's most talented monster hunters hunt an injured and depowered monster designed for small creatures. This all happens in the gothic, lavish castle of Ulysses Bloodstone, the former holder of the Bloodstone. His lair is full of resources and humble brags, like the tapestry storytelling style painted on the walls. This is a depiction of what looks like a member of the species that Gorr the God Butcher came from, surrounded by Latin that translates to end of life, eater of breath. Or at least that's what the web translator says. As it turns out, the decor of the hallway was trying to warn the hunters of the dangers of someone infected with lycanthropy or werewolfism. They know the dangers of standing in the way of a werewolf, probably because they met Jack's ancestor back in 1795. Grigory Rusov lost his wife when she refused to bow to a newly triumphant Dracula, establishing himself as the sovereign of Transylvania. Grigory was more successful than you'd think, but it still ended up with him getting bitten by Dracula's werewolf and catching a bit of lycanthropy. Jack comes from a long line of werewolves by night. For Jack, it's probably pretty weird to be in a house where they painted that time they killed your great-great-great-grandpa on the wall. It's a werewolf movie based on a comic book line where the werewolf's non-werewolf name is Jack Russell, as in Jack Russell Terrier. That doesn't seem like a setup for a conversation about German Expressionism, but it's the best reason to talk about German Expressionism. The Cliff Notes is this: the Edisons of the world felt that since film perfectly recorded things in motion, it was the duty of the filmmaker to perfectly recreate life on film. Essentially, a 100-year-old version of the discussion between a realistic Christopher Nolan approach or a stylized Tim Burton approach. The German Expressionists, as the name would imply, were not particularly interested in the real world, but rather ones they could create. Using harshly contrasting lights and darks and jagged artificial sets, the movies did what German Expressionists did best: contemplate the ever-maddening universe and its effect on one's grip on reality. When 1930s Germany became a little inhospitable to people who like to criticize modern society's effect on the human psyche, many German directors found themselves in Hollywood, putting their expressionist stamp on the horror and crime genre, the latter referred to as film noir. Werewolf by Night carries the German influence in lighting and set design. There was a subtle add to the ultimately shot on digital Werewolf by Night to give it that out-of-the-vault look. If you've ever seen a projectionist in the analog days, or just one of those guys who can quote most of Fight Club, it's easy to catch. The marking on the film reel nicknamed the cigarette burn. For those who haven't heard Tyler Durden's description, physical print movies came to the theater in usually 4 to 5 film reels, which had to be loaded individually. Then the projectionist would see the first mark and use the second mark to seamlessly flip the feed from the previous reel to the next. Walter Langowski is the ultimate expression of a Golden Age superhero and a Silver Age superhero. He is, of course, a genius with degrees in physics from Pennsylvania State, where he was attending on a football scholarship. He would then take the money he earned as a Green Bay Packer to get an additional degree from MIT that found him in a research position for gamma radiation. Let's just skip ahead. Yes, he does experiment on himself, and it doesn't turn out too great. The ultra-rich former football star gamma radiation specialist who can turn into a slightly more aggro version of himself. One of the Bloodstone history drawings looks like he's on the run with the old Sasquatch, or they did a real number on the Wendigo. Similar to Sasquatch, but so much more disturbing, there are depictions of hunting Wendigo, as well as a mounted Wendigo head decorating the Grand Hunting Hall. Marvel's Wendigo is based on the Great Plains and Canadians' First Nations people and their legend of a powerful spirit that takes over humans who either begun to eat human flesh or would get the urge to. Just imagine the Donner Party, but with big furry monsters. In the Marvel universe, they tend to run into the Hulk a lot, who tries to use the frozen north of Canada to avoid people and Wolverine for some reason. While the Widow Bloodstone is demonstrably terrible to Man-Thing, it looks like old Ulysses has done the shambling beast a solid by taking out a recurring thorn in his side: Thog the Netherspawn. That's just fun to say. Thog, another dimensional demon, made his way to Earth the way so many eldritch horrors do, by having young teenage girls get a hold of a magic tome and seeing if it works. Kind of makes barreling down hills on bikes without helmets lightweight in the end. Teen girls in horror genres have way more destructive behavior, which is to say it worked, and Thog found his way into our realm and immediately went on an eating spree, hoping to use the one who summoned him as an amuse-bouche. We'll get into that for a moment, but keeping that kind of thing from happening is Man-Thing's job, so he was on hand to stop it. Thog's initial form, a serpent-style body with wings on the shoulders, appears mounted on the wall. How did the most charming being in the whole special end up being the one who only grunted and could only emote through his lonely glowing yellow eyes and his level of comfort with his friend Jack? Also, why is this otherwise terrifying mound of vegetation named Ted? And why do we keep calling him Man-Thing? Like many bad ideas in the Marvel universe, this is the result of trying to recreate the super soldier serum. Brilliant scientists, limited resources, the risk of their work being corrupted, an emergency situation, and ill-conceived self-experimentation has scientist Dr. Ted Sallis inject his SO2 formula developed with Dr. Connors, better known as the Lizard. So, good partner. Injected with his own serum, he drove his car into the swamps of the Everglades, running from the organization AIM. The magic of the swamp and the super science of the serum turned Ted into the Man-Thing. The magic was because that part of the Everglades happens to be the nexus of all realities, and the Man-Thing is the nexus's doorman. Now that we are knee-deep in the multiverse saga, Man-Thing is certain to play an important role in the future. Depending on how you view canon and continuity, this is not the Man-Thing's first time in the MCU. The first season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was much more directly related to the events of the movies than subsequent seasons, especially since it centered around the revelation that Hydra had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. In the aftermath, while managing S.H.I.E.L.D.'s high-power prisons, Agent Hill wraps up a phone call with the question, who or what is a Man-Thing? Before Jack Kirby and Stan Lee started filling up their new Marvel universe with genre-defining characters, Timely Comics' bread and butter was in horror and romance comics. One of the most popular horror comics came from EC. That's Tales from the Crypt. That series would get newfound popularity when in the 80s it was adapted into a television series. Like the comic books, the stories were presented by the Crypt Keeper, an animated corpse making graveyard puns. Ulysses is clearly a fan because he had his corpse turned into a crank-operated automaton to give out his dying wishes, complete with a Crypt Keeper style pun. If there's one thing we've learned from Mad Max Fury Road director George Miller, it's that everything goes better when someone's playing an instrument that shoots fire. The monster hunters are led from their monster hunting hall to the monster hunting grounds by a menacing sousaphone player whose bell shoots fire. For such an important role, you can't get just anyone to handle your doom notes. Fortunately, they were able to wander down the Disney lot from their offices to those of The Simpsons, where longtime Simpsons producer David Silverman is more than willing to do what he loves: play tuba. Silverman is so into playing the tuba, his Twitter handle is @Tobatron. Jack and Elsa have a moment of peace together when they begin to contemplate their future of never getting out of the family mausoleum that they have accidentally trapped themselves in. It is where they are able to bond over the problems of having parents whose lust for power of the arcane has ended up cursing generations. That reminds Elsa of her favorite aunt, who is also known as a preparer. That aunt's name was Frances. There's no specific record of a Francis Bloodstone in the Marvel Universe, but Bloodstone does make his way back to Earth at some point and uses the alias Frank. Jack Russell has spent his entire life since the age of 18 sharing his body with that of a werewolf. You know, the one by night. Taking a broad view of a full moon that would give Neil deGrasse Tyson a bit of a huff, he spends 3 nights every lunar cycle getting his werewolf on. Plus, for just about as long, his name has been Jack Russell. With all of that, it appears that he's developed a few dog mannerisms. Trapped inside the cage after the monster hunter discovers that Jack is a monster and not one of them, he tries to calm the fears of Elsa, who is also inside the cage, waiting for the family's bloodstone to change Jack Russell into a werewolf by night. Before that can happen, as he discusses options and how the change takes place, he gives the back of his neck a quick scratch, a bit like a dog. The Netflix Defender series was a sea of change to the theatrical MCU that was still managing its Joss Whedon building blocks of making sure to undercut every strong emotional scene with humor. Instead, Daredevil, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, and Iron Fist remained stoic. One of the more impressive quirks the Defenders developed was the single-take fight sequence, with the leading example being the hallway fight at the end of the first season's 2nd episode. The slow-moving camera not only accentuated the kinetic force of the fight, not by following it, but by allowing the subjects to move in and out of frame, but also the toll the fight was taking on Murdoch. Werewolf by Night does its own single take, as Jack, turned into a werewolf, rips his way through the Bloodstone guards. The camera slowly tracks into the foyer where a stone barrier is closing behind the guards rushing to their inevitable doom. Like Daredevil, the werewolf moves in and out of frame, but this time to demonstrate how terrifying his speed and brutality is, as the camera lens begins to get covered in PG-13 friendly black and white blood. Werewolf by Night wasn't completely black and white. It's like a lot of modern movies that employ black and white while selecting a single object to present in color. In this case, the bloodstone that everyone is trying to earn by hunting the Man-Thing. When Elsa, Jack, and Ted manage to take care of the monster hunters, that finally ends Ulysses' Bloodstone legacy by putting the differently aligned Elsa in charge, and the buddies Jack and Ted able to relax and hang out like the friends they are. Even though it's 2 monsters and 1 powerful and trained monster hunter, the horror is gone, and so the color can return to the world. First through Elsa's red jacket, then spreading to the rest of creation. All of this happens to a rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the most famous song from The Wizard of Oz. That movie, from the time period of movies Werewolf by Night is making a stylistic nod towards, is famous for, among other things, going from sepia tone black and white to vibrant color once Dorothy lands in Oz. Or it was an indication that you can play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon to Werewolf by Night and it will match up. Actually, probably not that. The lingering question is, where in the MCU timeline does Werewolf by Night take place? Or indeed, if it's even on the prime reality that we've been watching this entire time. As the guardian of the gateway to all realities, the Nexus, Man-Thing can easily move through multiple realities.